You think you have time. You think a cold is just a cold, and that the people you love will always be there tomorrow. Only weeks before, the strongest man in the room believed that too, right up until a hospital machine became the only sound. His wife sat beside him as it happened. And in that unthinkable moment, she made him a promise. What she vowed in that room has finally surfaced. And it changes everything. For nearly 3 weeks, she said almost nothing at all. Then, on the 10th of June, Samantha Busch opened Instagram and shared a single photograph that stopped the racing world cold. She is standing on the grass at Charlotte Motor Speedway with her 2 children. All 3 of them are staring at the number 8 painted into the ground, the same number her husband Kyle drove before he died. You can imagine how long she sat with that photo before she found the courage to write a single word. What she finally wrote was not angry. It was not bitter. It was honest in a way that is almost hard to read. She wrote about watching her son Brexton back at the track, heartbreaking and beautiful at the same time. She said there are moments when she catches a glimpse of Kyle in him. The same determination. The same spark. And for just a second, it feels like a piece of him is still right there. But here is what millions of people scrolling past that post never realized. Those words were not the beginning of her story. They were the answer to a promise made somewhere far darker than any racetrack. The room she was talking about was a hospital room in Charlotte, and the days that led her there happened so fast that the people closest to Kyle still struggle to believe it. Only days earlier, he had been racing. He felt a cold coming on during a road course in May and radioed his team to ask for a doctor afterward, just a shot to push through. That was the kind of competitor he was. He won a truck race at Dover while feeling sick. Then he climbed into another car for an exhibition race after that, refusing to let his body slow him down. Everything changed on the 20th of May. While running a practice session inside a racing simulator, Kyle suddenly became unresponsive. He was rushed to the hospital, and the family quickly learned that what they had treated like a stubborn cold was something far more dangerous. The bacterial pneumonia in his lungs had been building for days, maybe weeks. It had turned into sepsis, a brutal infection that races through the body and overwhelms it from the inside. The next afternoon, on the 21st of May, Kyle Busch was gone at the age of 41. But here is where it gets quiet, because sometime in those final hours, Samantha leaned close and made him a vow. She did not share it with the world right away. She kept it the way you keep the most sacred things, private. But weeks later, she finally let everyone in. In the hospital, she promised Kyle that she would do everything she could to help their children pursue their dreams, no matter what. Read that again and let it land. In the worst moment of her entire life, with her husband slipping away in front of her, she was not thinking about herself. She was thinking about Brexton and Lennox, and she was promising the man she loved that their children would never have to give up on the dreams he helped them build. Most of us make promises we forget within a week. A promise made at the side of a dying husband is a completely different kind of weight. It follows you into every quiet morning and every sleepless night. And barely 2 weeks after she made it, Samantha was already being asked to keep it, on the very ground where her husband should have been standing beside her. In the first week of June, less than 2 weeks after losing his father, 11-year-old Brexton Busch buckled into a small car and rolled onto the track at Charlotte for a youth race. The car was bright green, wearing the number 18, the number his dad made famous during the most successful years of his career. Stuck to that car was a single word that told you everything about why he was there. Rowdy. The old nickname fans had been shouting at his father for 20 years. The boy was carrying his dad onto the track with him. And what happened next was bittersweet in the truest meaning of the word. In one race he climbed from the back and finished 6th. In another he led nearly the entire way, and then on the final lap, a friend slipped past and stole the win at the last possible second. Brexton came home 2nd. So close it must have stung badly. But the boy showed a maturity that left grown adults speechless. He congratulated the friend who beat him. He admitted a small mistake. And he said simply that it felt really good to be racing again.
No tantrum. No excuses.
Just a kid who had clearly been raised by a fierce competitor who also knew how to lose with grace. Before the racing even began, the family gave Kyle a goodbye that left the grandstands in tears. Kyle's own father drove a slow honorary lap while the other drivers held an empty space in their formation, the spot where Kyle should have been. Brexton stood at the flag stand and waved the green flag himself, sending his grandfather around the track in his dad's honor. But Brexton was not the only child Kyle left behind. And the promise his mother made did not stop with him. Because there was a little girl in this story too, and a tiny gift waiting in the garage that will break your heart. Her name is Len Nix, and she is only 4 years old. She is far too young to understand that the daddy who used to lift her into victory lane is never coming back. In the same message where Samantha revealed her promise, she wrote about Len Nix too. They had just bought the little girl a cart for her 4th birthday. If Len Nix wants to get behind the wheel someday, Samantha wrote, it won't be the same as having Kyle by her side, but they will do their absolute best. What makes the promise so powerful is what Samantha refused to do. She did not turn her children into a project meant to honor a dead man. She made it clear that racing has to stay their choice, not hers. And if one day either child wants to walk away from racing entirely and chase something completely different, that is perfectly okay too. The promise was never really about cars. It was about dreams, whatever those dreams turned out to be. You start to understand why she keeps returning to the racetrack even though every visit reopens the wound. For nearly 20 years, that track was home. And when so much of her world suddenly feels strange and unfamiliar, it is one of the only places that still does. Yet the more you learn about the man she lost, the more you realize the public never truly knew him. The Kyle Busch that millions cheered and booed on Sunday afternoons was only half the story. And the other half was revealed in the smallest possible place, a few text messages sent the day before he died. For most of his career, Kyle Busch was the man fans loved to hate. He feuded with other drivers. He spoke his mind when he probably should have stayed quiet. He made enemies as easily as he won races. For years he was the villain of the sport. The driver half the grandstand showed up hoping to watch lose. But there was another Kyle hiding behind that helmet, and one of the men who knew him best finally pulled back the curtain. Dale Earnhardt Jr. went on his podcast not long after the death and shared something that left fans in pieces. The two men had spent years barely tolerating each other. Their feud was real and it ran deep. But in recent times they had quietly made peace and had even started planning to race together for fun in a smaller series. Dale revealed they were texting back and forth the very day before Kyle died, working out the details. Kyle asked which number he should run. Dale told him he could pick anything he wanted. And the number Kyle chose was the Dale Jr. 8, the famous number Dale had driven during the biggest years of his own career. A sign of deep respect from one former enemy to another. Then Kyle sent the very last text in their conversation. It was a small explosion emoji, followed by 2 simple words. Race fans. That was Kyle Busch with his guard completely down. Not the angry villain the cameras love to show, just a grown man who still got giddy like a kid at the thought of racing for the pure joy of it. And that is the cruel twist hiding inside this whole story. The fiercest, most competitive driver of his generation spent his final healthy days simply being a friend and a father. His last messages were not about trophies. They were not about grudges. They were about helping a friend and chasing a little more joy with the people he loved. No one carried a heavier silence than Kurt Busch, Kyle's older brother. The two of them had raced against each other since they were boys. Their relationship had its rough patches over the years, the way most brothers do, but the bond underneath was unbreakable. For weeks Kurt said nothing in public. Then he finally shared a message that read like a man trying to hold himself together. He reflected on the days when he and Kyle would race anything they could get their hands on. He wrote that they pushed each other, learned from each other, and that no trophy or championship could ever measure the impact his brother had on his life. Then he ended with the words that finished off anyone still holding back tears. His heart was broken, he wrote, but he knew his brother's spirit would always ride with him. Rest easy, little brother. The grief was not contained to one family. The entire sport came to a complete stop. At the famous Coca-Cola race in Charlotte, they painted a black number 8 into the infield grass. Then on the 8th lap of the race, the broadcast went completely silent. Fans across the grandstand raised 8 fingers into the air. It was a tribute to a number. But it was really a tribute to a man. Kyle's team made a promise of its own. They would park the number 8 and never let anyone else drive it. The car would sit waiting, reserved for one person only, ready for the day Brexton is old enough to claim it himself. All of that love, as beautiful as it was, could not change what waited for Samantha when the cameras turned off and the crowds went home. When the tributes faded and the noise finally died down, what remained was a young widow and 2 children trying to figure out how to live inside a house that suddenly felt far too quiet. She did not pretend to be strong. She wrote that their hearts were absolutely shattered, and admitted there were moments when the weight of the loss felt impossible to carry. The world sees the brave Instagram post. The strong mother standing tall at the racetrack. The world does not see the late nights, the empty side of the bed, or the small voice of a 4-year-old asking a question that has no good answer. It would be easy to remember Kyle Busch only for the numbers. 2 championships. More race wins across the sport than any driver who ever lived. For years he was the man fans showed up to boo. But by the end, something remarkable had happened. The same crowds that once jeered him had slowly come to love him, won over by his honesty, his fire, and the devotion he showed to his family. Samantha is not asking anyone to remember the trophies. She is asking the world to remember the dad who spent his free days go-karting with his son and buying a little cart for his daughter. She is making absolutely sure that the dreams he helped build do not die along with him. So when she closed her message with 4 small words, she was not just describing a racetrack. She was describing a way of surviving the unthinkable. No matter how heavy the grief becomes, no matter how empty the seat beside her feels, she and her children are choosing to move forward and keep his memory alive. So, we race on.